So let's start by talking about Triumph of the Will, and if you could talk, first of all, about the importance of the film itself and then what it meant to Leni.
Triumph of the Will is one of 5 films that she made for the Third Reich. You heard her say in here it was 6 days out of my life, and that was part of her post-war approach to it. That why should I spend 101 years, which is how long she lived, why should I spend 101 years apologizing for 6 days that I spent making what was, in fact, not a political film at all, but an artistic film that I did because of someone about whom I had an idea he was in politics. I wasn't quite sure what he did, but I knew it was something worthwhile. So, I mean, there is so much loaded in what you just heard that is part of her personality and what I tried to deal with in the book, that it becomes very tangled and complicated. But the simple way to cut through it, I think, is the way virtually everyone that I interviewed in Germany or elsewhere who had known her and had worked with her started off the interview with the same joke. And the joke was, she only lies when her mouth is open. I heard this in English, I heard it in French, I heard it in German, and I heard it over and over again. These people really meant it. So what you need to understand about Triumph of the Will is that it's one of 5 films. It's of course a film about the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg, but it's not the first of those films that she made, it's the second. And there was another that would follow after Triumph of the Will. But Triumph of the Will was a full-length feature. It was distributed commercially. It was in distribution throughout the entirety of the Third Reich into 1945 as the bombs were falling and the cinemas were collapsing around the spectators' shoulders. But its political aims were recognized so clearly by Hitler that no other Hitler film was ever made after this, because no one needed another one. But when he annexed Austria in 1938, this film was immediately put into 17 theaters in metropolitan Vienna in anticipation of the sort of fake plebiscite that was held so that the Austrians could vote yes to their own annexation as part of the Third Reich. So that's within the same week of the plebiscite. Hitler made sure that this film was on 17 metropolitan screens in Vienna. So what Leni Riefenstahl's assignment was not how to aestheticize a political rally, something that any cameraman from MSNBC can do and will do, a year from September or whatever. It was how to aestheticize the Fuhrer and all that means when everybody in Germany is a little bit shaky about how are we supposed to move forward with somebody that we know has just murdered half of the people, including, and this was so well known, I don't know, the analogy would be something like George Bush and Karen Hughes. It was so well known that Ernst Röhm, the head of the stormtroopers, was purported to be the only member of the Nazi Party who was on a du basis with Hitler rather than the Sie basis, the you plural. And 2 months before this is filmed, Hitler had him murdered. So that's what Triumph of the Will, that's the subtext of Triumph of the Will, is that Triumph of the Will is the movie she made to make Hitler safe for Germany. That's a really long answer. I'm
well,
sorry, but I think that's what you have to know when you look at all of this.
Yeah, what it gets at, and what I want to ask you before we get into what was Leni Riefenstahl's attraction to Hitler, because it seemed like she was really drawn to him, and everything about her personality and her own artistic ambition drew her to Adolf Hitler. let's talk a little bit about your work as biographer, because you did a book. You've done 3 biographies now. You did one on Mozart. You did a book on Marlene Dietrich, which I guess in a way might have led you to wanting to do this book. And then talk about, since everything out of Leni Riefenstahl's mouth, as you established, is a lie, and your book is all about getting at the truth, what was the material that you found to work with that let you get to this? So what drew you to doing this project, and then what did you have to work with that would kind of let you get at the truth?
Dietrich was the entrance into the subject, because the odd coincidence is that Marlene Dietrich and Leni Riefenstahl were born just 8 months apart in almost contiguous neighborhoods
of Berlin.
In Berlin. Yeah, and they had very, very similar early careers. They were both sexually liberated. They were both, great looking. They both were violently ambitious, and they sort of came together. They were neighbors. They knew each other a little bit. And I had written this book about Dietrich. I had studied as a film school student with Joseph von Sternberg. I had done my PhD thesis on Joseph von Sternberg, who had discovered Dietrich and made The Blue Angel and a bunch of other movies. And Leni Riefenstahl's name kept coming up. And I talked with Dietrich, and Dietrich thought that Leni Riefenstahl was a contemptible person, and she just laughed about her whenever her name came up. And part of the reason was that Leni Riefenstahl had it in her head and in her memoirs and in many interviews that if Marlene Dietrich had not been chosen for The Blue Angel, it would have been she, Leni Riefenstahl. Now, what Leni Riefenstahl forgot was that one reason Dietrich was chosen to sing Falling in Love Again in that movie was because she could sing, and the other reason was because she could speak English, neither one of which Leni Riefenstahl could do. So it is really a stretch, and I think it's perfectly conceivable that Joseph von Sternberg went to Berlin, met Leni Riefenstahl, and said, listen, have dinner with me and let's talk about your future. This is possible. The idea that she could have been Dietrich's competition for that is absurd. But that sort of is how I got into it.
So that explains the fascination with her. But then you have to write the book and you have to do the research. So what was it that made you think that you can get beyond this wall of denial and lies? And it's almost like you're watching a lawyer when you're looking at Leni Riefenstahl talk about herself.
One of the things was the fall of the Berlin Wall, because I knew that there was documentation. The denazification hearings that you saw some reference to in this film, the denazification hearings for Riefenstahl were over by 1950. But the documentation about her career and about her relationship with the people in the party has been trickling out ever since then. And much of it has been in a flood since the fall of the Berlin Wall, because so much of the paperwork was held by the Russians, the Russians who knew that they had it, but who were being mum about it, saying absolutely nothing about it. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is 1989, that stuff started to trickle back. And there are still diaries of Goebbels, for instance, that no German knew existed, because they were all in Moscow. And there are diaries that are still being translated and put into book form in Munich at the Institute for Contemporary History. And I was able to get access to those things because I live in Germany part of the time, and partly because I was just dogged and wanted to go after it. I had some lucky breaks where I came upon documentation that was not available to anyone else, and that was very lucky. But the most recent things that are in the book are things that actually came to physical light when she turned 100 years old in 2002. and not all of the documentation has yet been sifted and evaluated, and there may be some minor little chapters yet to reconsider about her life. But so much of it was because, A, the Germans were famously good at keeping records, suicidal,
Right.
though that may be, and that because they were so bureaucratic that when they were doing something for a nefarious reason, they said so in the documentation. An example for that is the Olympic film. The Olympic film, which to the end of, you need to understand that to the end of Leni Riefenstahl's life, she made money off the Nazis. She continued to earn royalties from Triumph of the Will and from the Olympic films and the other films that she made. But she continued to maintain to the end of her life that the party had nothing whatever to do with her films about the Olympics of 1936, all of which is untrue. The film was totally financed by the Nazi Party, and there is this documentation in which it says, I can't give you the exact wording, it's in the book if you care to look it up, and in quotes and with footnote citations and so on, where the documents actually say, we have set up the Leni Riefenstahl Film Company as a blind so that no one will know the Nazi Party is financing the film. So, but this is part of that German bureaucratic and record-keeping mentality. Well, none of those records were available. They were not available to the courts that let Leni off with a mere fellow traveler or sympathizer a judgment,